I'm Travis Williams, professor of chemistry at USC. My background is kind of screwy. I'm a high school dropout. Instead of being a junior in high school, went to the University of North Texas for a couple of years, then transferred into Caltech, started over as a freshman, graduated in 3 years, went to Stanford to get a PhD. And then I came back to Caltech as an NIH postdoc for 2 years before I started here.
Wow, that's really impressive. So, how did you get interested in research in the first place?
It's fun to do. So what happened was I took organic when I was at UNT. Organic chemistry is really a kind of interesting STEM class because it's analytically rigorous, like any of the math or whatnot that you've taken, but it's also very visual and three-dimensional. And so I enjoyed that combination of something that's very applied, very easy to see and manipulate, but that had technical rigor to it. I also kind of like that organic chemistry, much like biosciences, but to a lesser extent, is sort of beyond our ability to predict de novo. And so there's a lot of reasoning by analogy and empirical thinking in this science. And I like that because being good at this is sort of knowledge and experience driven. So somebody who's a pattern recognizer like me, as opposed to a de novo calculator, can be pretty good at this. It's a good fit to my skill set, and it has a really nice applied bent to it.
So, in understandable terms to a high schooler, could you give me an overview of your research?
Okay, we're involved in a couple of things. One thing we're interested in is if you go to the beach, not so much in California, but certainly in Hawaii, around the Pacific Rim, on the Gulf Coast, you swim around in the waves, you will find a lot of plastic swirling around in the ocean. There is a lot of plastic in the ocean. And plastic is foundationally is a petrochemical. It's stable. And whilst we know that microplastics are bad for marine life, it's generally inert. But what do we usually do with petrochemicals? We burn them as fuel. So there's this huge amount of energy in petrochemicals that are encoded in these plastics that we have wasted by setting them loose in the ocean, where they're not doing us any good, and they're certainly not helping the marine life. The biggest project we have in my lab is how do you get the carbon and energy back from ocean source plastic?
That's really cool.
Yeah, and so the way we do it, the strategy is I'm a chemist, I study catalysis. We have catalytic conditions that utilize dioxygen, O2, to break it into small molecules. Well, they're pretty terrible. It's just some awful assortment of junk. But when you oxidize that carbon source a little bit, you make it look like fats that microorganisms can digest. So I have a buddy who I went to college with who is the chairman of pharmacy here at USC, and he takes the stuff that we make by chemical reaction, and he uses a fermentation reaction with an engineered fungus then to convert it into pharmaceutical drugs, fine chemicals, biomaterials, and other really expensive things. So you can harness that mass and energy that we've wasted by putting petrochemicals in the ocean and turn it back into something that's expensive enough that that money could support the cost of making it. So this might actually be economically viable. So that's the biggest thing we're doing in my lab. Another thing that we're doing is, and it's a similar chemical problem, but what do you know about what airplanes are made out of?
I don't know a lot. I think steel.
Steel is too heavy. Metal airplanes are made out of aluminum. And you know how they put it together? They rivet the aluminum. Riveting is something that you got to do by hand. It's very time consuming. Pre-pandemic, like in the 90s, Boeing and Airbus decided that instead of riveting aluminum, they were going to use an organic chemistry approach, taking carbon fibers with these thermal setting epoxy materials. And the thing about manufacturing with that is carbon fiber epoxy composites are a lot lighter, stiffer, and stronger than metals. Lighter is great because you can make a lighter airplane, it burns less fuel, much cheaper, less CO2. Everybody loves that, right? But to make these materials, to make carbon fibers, to make epoxies are very energy intensive. And so you don't realize all that CO2 savings because you end up making a very complicated material. And while you can manufacture the airplane a lot faster than you can by riveting aluminum, you make a much better airplane. The only thing we know how to do with that material at the end of its life is bury it in the ground. So we're using our polymer degradation technology to unthermoset those thermoset epoxies, get the carbon fibers back so that you can manufacture those into other products that rely on carbon fiber, like sailboats and golf clubs and bicycles and car parts and stuff like that. That's sort of the big project. We're also very active in hydrogen. So if you drive in a car, there's gasoline, right? The energy content in the gasoline is mostly in the hydrogens through CH bonds. And frankly, gasoline is a great fuel, right? It's a liquid, you can transfer it safely. I mean, you can drive into a gas station and pump 14 terawatts of energy into your car in a matter of 5 minutes. But it's got this drawback of atmospheric CO2. And so the energy department and a lot of us in the community want to try to find ways to operate vehicles and things that use gasoline or diesel liquid fuels on hydrogen H2 itself. Hydrogen is very light, so the weight energy density is awesome, but hydrogen is a gas, so the volume or size energy density is terrible. We have invented methods to take liquids that are rich in hydrogen, pull the hydrogen out, release it as a gas, and then whatever that carrier is, like we like ethanol, for example, because you make it from corn. The two carbons in ethanol, then we spit out as acetate, which is a highly privileged fertilizer. It benefits farming. We can simultaneously provide this very clean energy carrier without emitting CO2, detoxify farming because we're displacing less benign chemicals from the farm by introducing acetates. So yeah, so we've invented a lot of feedstock interconversion reactions like that, where we take something that we have in excess because it comes out of agriculture, because we see it as a waste. We turn it into something that is some new emerging chemical that is displacing traditional pesticides or toxic materials from the economy somewhere. And that's a big DOE supported project that we have in the lab.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then what's one of the biggest challenges that you've faced in research?
Recruiting, finding good students. It's changed. It's changed over my career. Initially, finding money was the biggest problem. And then finding good problems and good solutions for those problems became the sort of the limiting issue. But then as I've gotten older, I've gotten really good at finding important problems, which makes it really easy to raise money. And so right now I'm sort of sitting on a war chest of money from the energy department, from NOAA as an oceanic administration that protect the oceans, right? From the NSF that wants to know how to unthermoset the aircraft thermoset, and all these other agencies. Wind blades, like how do we recycle wind blades? Nobody knows. We're working on that as well. They're high profile, important problems. So I've got plenty of money, but finding outstanding graduate students who have great training, strong in math, really strong in science, really dedicated, keen to work on these problems, keen to become really, really gifted synthetic chemists. These people are hard to find.
Yeah, okay. And then in contrast to that, what do you enjoy most about your research?
Solving problems is fun. Working with smart people is a lot of fun. I guess the best part of the job is when we propose something, it seems outlandish, we give it a shot, and the first time we get it to work, that's pretty sweet, right? Early career graduate students. So you graduate from college, you decide to go to graduate school. In college, a thing that has in common with high school is that there's going to be a prescriptive list of courses you have to take to get a degree. And once you completed them, you get your degree, right? You walk across the stage and you win. College is different from high school in that how you learn in those classes is not very prescriptive. So your high school teachers are going to tell you, read this, do this, here's your homework, test is on this day, blah, 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 blah. When I teach undergrads, I tell them, okay, this is what you've got to learn. Here's what I think about it. Here's some problems. There's a book. figure it out. If you can't figure it out, here's me and a team of experts, and we'll answer your questions. But you kind of got to self-initiate. In graduate school, you take that step to a whole nother level, which is here's a problem. Nobody's ever solved it. I think one of these things might work. See what you can do. And that's kind of terrifying, right? Because that's different from college, where, oh, yeah, if you take these courses, you get a degree. No, now in graduate school, to get a degree, you have to solve a problem nobody's dealt with before. And I don't know how to do it. If I knew how to do it, it wouldn't be worth doing. It's a really rewarding moment when you have one of these early career graduate students sort of terrified. In your second year, you have to demonstrate progress. In your third year, you got to demonstrate creativity. In your fifth year, you got to graduate. And they have no idea what the problem's going to be. They have no idea what this is going to look like. You shouldn't when you're new, right? Because you're new. But then when we try something, maybe the second or third thing we've tried, and it works the second or third time we try it, and you're like, oh my God, this is it. We could write a thesis about this. And then all of a sudden, the student figures it out. That's a moment.
And then, which person or mentor in your field has made the biggest impact on you?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I mean, I had some outstanding mentors when I was in training. They were all very valuable. They were all very different. They looked at problems differently. They looked at different kinds of problems. I read a lot of people who were famous like when they were young. So they're famous now, and then go back when they were my age, like in college or in grad school or as an assistant professor. What did they do then? And I studied people who became famous. How did they start? I learned a lot from doing that. I couldn't tell you I got a role model because I never wanted to confine myself to the excellence, abilities, or impact of any one person. I try to learn the lessons of everybody I look at and take as much as I can.
Okay, I think that's a great perspective. And then, were there any pivotal moments in your research career that made you change topic or
Oh yeah, all the time. So when I was in college, there was a guy on the Caltech faculty, Bob Grubbs. He got a Nobel Prize in 2005 for a reaction called olefin metathesis. He's pretty good, right? Also one of the nicest guys you ever met in chemistry. A thing I noticed about Bob was that if you go to the Caltech, student symposia and you look at who's working on what and who's doing this or that, there's some research labs where every year they're using the same methods to study the same problems, and they're just kind of getting better at it and evolving their way through this related variations on a theme. In Bob's lab, every year it was something completely new and off the wall. It's just like every time I turn around, he's looking at something new. And there were things in the Grubbs group, like olefin metathesis catalysts, that he'd been doing for 50 years. But every time I went to symposium, there's some cockamamie new thing going on in this lab. And there were several folks at Caltech that were this way. And I thought, yeah, that's who I want to be. I want to be the guy that's looking at something different, trying something new every couple of years. We first started working on plastics 3 years ago. It's now the best funded activity in my lab. We've been looking at hydrogen for 15 years. We're still doing it, but we're doing it with entirely different problems, projects, and catalysts than we were back in the day, and entirely different sponsors as well, because as our interests and technologies changed, now we're looking at how do you disrupt the farm? How do you introduce applied technology that's scalable? As opposed to when we started, we were looking at what are the basic concepts of moving H among different atoms like boron, carbon, ruthenium, oxygen, et cetera, and how do those basic reactions work? Now we're looking at like, could you sell this? Which it's a whole different spines now, instead of the National Science Foundation's Department of Energy that wants to do that, right? I reinvent myself as often as I can.
Okay, that sounds like much more exciting.
Yeah.
And then, where do you see your research field expanding to, and what are some interesting topics that can be further explored within like the next 10 years?
Well, I think we'll still be working on plastics. I really like to figure out a much more scalable chemical process for general polymer cleavage. I like to understand a lot better. So we in a group at NREL were the first to introduce the concept of first you use chemistry, then you use biology to upgrade plastics. But nobody has really understood what are we really trying to do chemically to make something that the microorganism wants to eat. The world has been working on this for like 2 years. And we've only been asking, like, what can we get away with feeding to the microbe? I'm starting to really ask, what does the microbe want? And then how can I, as a chemist, make that out of an increasingly diverse bunch of chemical feedstocks that we're throwing away? I'm also trying to figure out, some people say the majority of plastic that is manufactured ends up in the ocean. I can't believe that, right? The majority is going to end up either recycled or in the landfill or combusted to recover energy. But there's no doubt that there's a ton of it in the ocean. That stuff's buoyant, so it's floating. What does it look like to create something that floats, that's portable, that could break the plastic? Let's say we don't upgrade it. Let's just say we unleash this chemical entity into the ocean. It floats on the top, and then it finds the plastic and it chops it up into something that a fish could digest. And we just sort of very slowly start turning this plastic into fish food. And then the fish eat it and it goes away. You've heard the story of oil spills, right? So in the oil spill, there's nothing you can do but clean it up and try to put it somewhere. But then they figured it out, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, that there's some microbes that'll eat the oil. And so then that's great, right? You can just kind of corral it and hit it with these microbes. The thing is that microbial digestion is incredibly slow, 10,000 times slower than useful. So when we go chew up plastics, the reason we do a chemical step is that we get 100,000 million X rate enhancement, to where instead of chewing up that oil spill over many, many years, we chew it up over a period of an hour or 2 hours and then go on to upgrade. Okay, so here's my question. So if you could somehow make that chemistry work in a way that's environmentally benign, and you could send that chemistry after the oil spill, convert the oil spill or the plastic island or whatever the hell it is, convert it into something that the microbe could eat, would promote the growth of oceanic plankton, a fish would eat it, and we could put all those carbons back into the food chain and we could do it safely. That's a game changer, right? Because now, instead of killing marine life, we are proliferating marine life. There's going to be some ethical and environmental questions about how much of that you want to do. But now, instead of tens of thousands of year degradation time, we could cut it to a couple of years degradation time, figure out how much of that we can do safely and start chipping away at the mess.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And then, how did you find your passion for research, and how would you suggest someone else try to find their own passion for research?
So a thing that I didn't understand early on is that the whole research enterprise is about the problem. You got to pick a problem that you like and then start reading about it and figure out who's working in this space and what are they doing. And then hopefully you'll eventually find some things like, this is a cool approach, this is a cool approach, etc. Start following those people who are doing the cool approaches, and then eventually you'll understand them well enough to say, wait a second, I don't understand why you did it this way. You should have done it that way. And that's when you know you're ready to enter the field, right? Because now you've got a strategy that they're not thinking about, that makes sense to you for some reason, to solve a problem that you're really interested in.
And then, what kind of skills do you think a high schooler could develop, even if they don't have access to a wet lab?
Problem selection is kind of clutch. So I would look around the planet and think about, what are the problems that I find really offensive? What are the products that we are missing? What are the things I'd like to be able to do that we can't? Who's working on it? How are they doing it? And just start thinking about these things and kind of follow the technology for a while, so that when it's time for you to start designing research program of your own, you have some perspective on what's has been done in this area and what you can do that's unique. One of the frustrations I have with younger students when I try to recruit is, in my line of work, you need some technical skills. So at some point, as you're sort of surveying problems you'd like to work on, think about, what kind of problem is this? Is this a chemistry-like problem? Is this an economics-like problem? Is this a biosciences problem? Is this a medical problem? And then once you've kind of discovered that, oh, all the problems that I'm interested seem to be centered around astronomy, then okay, great. I got to do the things that would train me to be a good astronomer. And that's going to be become really good at math, become really good at physics, understand the night sky, understand what's happening at NASA and the major telescopes, meet people in the field. I figured it out what would have been my sophomore year in high school that I was going into molecular sciences. I was going into chemistry. And so I knew get really good at chemistry, take as much chemistry as you can, take as much math as you can, particularly geometry and differential equations type things. Get good at physics, at least to the applied physics. Learn how to build, learn how to manipulate glass, figure out how chemicals move around the economy, what the big companies are, what they're doing, where the money comes from, etc. After you kind of looked at problems that bother you that you want to work on, look at what disciplines are involved in addressing those problems, figure out which one you're good at and that you want to do for the rest of your life, and then figure out people who practice that discipline, what's their training, what's their skill set, and start developing it early.
So really just focusing on everything that you can do like in the present moment.
And the ones that are going to be really relevant to you down the line. Here's a good example. So I know forever I was going to be a chemist. Then you choose where you're going to go to college. Some people love literature and art history. I'm not one of them. So I went to this place called Institute of Technology. Of course, they've got requirements for history and literature and whatnot. Well, guess what I studied? History of physics, history of chemistry, scientific revolution, science in America, history of medicine. I mean, I'm the guy at the NSF study section that can quote the NSF Act of 1945 because that's what I learned in my college history classes. I took the economics of entrepreneurship, tax, things like that that impact my field. So knowing that I was going into that area early on enabled me to select a school and a course of study that were going to empower me across all disciplines to be good at what I wanted to do. Understanding the history of phrenology and its dismissal by the American Medical Association is a lot more useful to me today than understanding the kings of England.
Yeah, okay. And then just for a final question,
Yeah.
what's some advice that you would give to a high schooler who like wants to enter chemistry?
Look at it with both eyes open, make sure this is the right thing for you. And once it is, congratulations on your choice. This is a great one, right? And then look at chemistry and all of its peripheral disciplines, figure out what you love, figure out what that field is working on, and think about where you want to contribute.
So that's all the questions that I have for today, and thank you so much for meeting with me.
You bet. Rock and roll.